Oh, you can feel the excitement in the room. Way to be excited.
No, I was thinking I was bored on Saturday. Saturday night. I had an exciting Saturday day, which led into a boring Saturday night. I like the old saying, if you're bored, then you're boring. So I always I try to penalize myself when I'm bored. It's my fault. I'm boring.
Start yelling at yourself. Smack yourself in the face.
But I was like, I want to watch, I'm super stoked as you are, as everybody else is, for MindHunter Season 2. It feels like it's been 5 years in the making.
Yeah.
And I know it's coming out this month. We're in August now, and it's coming out.
Do we know that for sure, though?
On my Netflix. I don't know about anybody else's, but on my Netflix, when I go over to and click on MindHunter, it immediately says new season starts, and I think it says August 16th. I'm going off of memory here because I think it's a Friday.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was like, I even said I was alone in my family room, and I even said it out loud because I knew it was starting in August, but I was like very hopeful that and I was sitting there going, I have nothing to do tonight. Why is it not starting tonight? Because I would have burnt through that thing pretty good. I could have gave a good. I watched The Breakup, and I watched Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
I started The Breakup last week, just like randomly, like had nothing to do. Put it on just to be in the background.
Have you seen it before?
Yes.
The first half is super funny, I think, anyway. Just like Vince Vaughn's character Gary, he's a talker,
right? But I remember like the first time I watched it, thinking, "Oh, this is really funny," and then the second time I was watching it, just like I said in the background, I kept on thinking, "Man, Gary is a dick."
He is, yeah.
He's such a dick.
But that's what makes him funny. Like if you're willing to roll along with that character, much like Danny McBride's character in Eastbound and Down, Kenny Powers. If you're willing to accept that the guy at his core is an asshole that really only cares about what he wants, then you can roll with it and find him to be very funny, I think, anyway.
Right. Yeah, I remember thinking that when I watched it before, like, they're both at fault here. And then the second time thinking, wow, this guy is really a dick. Maybe just get the 10-piece, get the 10 lemons for the 10-piece lemon centerpiece.
12, was it 12
or
lemons?
Whatever it was.
Baby wants 12 lemons.
12.
But I think my favorite part, though, one of my favorite parts anyway, is when they're at the opening scene where they're at Wrigley Field and Vince Vaughn orders 6 hot dogs, and he's with the purpose of giving one to Jennifer Aniston, who he's going to try to hit on.
Yeah, he's wooing.
Yeah, and he's eating the hot dog, and he's like, I'm just going to sit here and enjoy my hot dog. And the guy sitting next to him, he doesn't know him. The guy sitting next to him like gives him a weird look, and Vaughn looks at him and goes, "What, you have a problem with me eating a hot dog, guy?" And his buddy John Farver. Why can I never know that guy's last name? John
Farvero.
Yeah, something like that. The chef. He's like the director of like Iron Man. Super successful, famous guy. Anyway, John's character, he goes, "I'll slap him right in his head." I'll smack him right in his head.
Well, we're just talking about this too because CrimeCon posted a video of this guy tossing trash out his car window, and this guy is cleaning it up, and eventually a bigger guy comes over and takes the pile of trash and tosses it back in the dude's car. Dude tries to get out. The dude kicks the door a couple times. If you want to see that, that's on our Twitter profile. But yeah, being that guy that just is not afraid to say, "Hey, what are you doing?
Right.
Stop doing that. Stop being an asshole."
You have a problem with me eating a hot dog, guy?
So no baseball games this weekend?
I went on Thursday.
Oh.
The Clippers are terrible. They've dropped a whole bunch since the All-Star break. They were number 1 in minor league, and then the All-Star break happened, and they might as well have just lost every game since then. They've won very few games. Yeah.
Well, maybe they'll turn it back around.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Saturday, I'm always on YouTube, and it always suggests things to me. That's where I get down these weird rabbit holes. And I think it might have been because I was looking up some stuff. There's some controversy over, I think it's called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is the new Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio movie, and it's loosely connected to Sharon Tate. But what I love about it is I have not seen the movie yet, but I've seen enough and watched enough interviews to know that that's in the story of these guys, but it's not what the movie is about. And the article that I was reading, or somebody was talking trash about the article, was basically saying, they didn't really talk much about the story, and they could have focused more on Sharon Tate and what happened.
The Tate LaBianco murders.
Yeah, the Charles Manson murders. And my issue with it, though, and what this guy was saying too, was that's not what the movie was about.
Right.
So your argument is the movie should have been more about that. Well, you don't go watch like a movie like Bull Durham and go, why don't they talk more about football? Or you don't go watch Varsity Blues and say, they didn't really talk about the World Series at all. It makes no sense. It's like the dumbest argument I've seen. Oh yeah, I went to see this movie Titanic, but they never once talked about submarines.
Yeah,
because that's not what
the breakup could have focused more on the Cubs game,
right? And hot dogs.
And Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure could have. Why didn't they dive more into the story of Joan of Arc? I mean, that's a brilliant story.
Yeah, but it's because they're white males. But
yeah, I didn't see the criticism, but it sounds silly.
It's just, yeah. I mean, I understand.
Why didn't they focus more on this? Why don't you go write a movie?
Right. You're allowed to focus on whatever you want to focus on.
Got a problem with me writing a movie, guy?
Yeah. It'd be like somebody saying, hey, I listened to your latest episode on the Delphi murders. Interesting stuff, but why isn't the episodes more about John Benet Ramsey? It's just kind of a dumb argument. And I understand that there's I think it's more by putting this, and again, I haven't seen the movie yet, but I think more it's about putting a timestamp on things. A lot of people, when you talk to people that lived in California, or even people that followed a lot of true crime, that was kind of and not even just true crime, but I was watching some stuff on Woodstock. And sometimes when you're watching these music documentaries and they talk about what was happening in California and what was happening in New York, that the Manson murders were a timestamp, and they felt like everything kind of changed once that happened. So I think that's probably why the director said, hey, let's use this as kind of an interesting backdrop to what is happening. So anyways, I need to watch that movie. But I think it's like 2 hours and 40 minutes long. Like that's a whopper of a movie. But yeah, so Saturday, I see the trailer for MindHunter Season 2. If you haven't seen Season 1, use a dummy, and you need to get on it. And then I sent you the clip.
Mm-hmm.
Normally I don't get replies when I send you these clips, but yeah, I think you're pretty stoked about it. So we're going to just play the audio of the clip, and it's only a minute long, but there's a lot of what they call those Easter eggs in the trailer. So we'll kind of talk about those. So let's play the trailer now.
Have you got somebody, Holden? Someone you can't catch? Only at night time I see you. In darkness I feel you. Right by my side, I'm inside many bright. Sometimes I wonder.
This person you're after, he has an overwhelming fantasy life.
What goes on in your mind, always silent and kind.
Fantasies of what he's done, what he wants to do.
Unlike the others.
These dreams will consume him. Soon the real world won't even compare.
How do we catch a fantasy, Ed?
If he's any good, you can't.
So obviously the audio does not do that justice.
No,
And-
you and I just watched it a little bit ago, and it was awesome to listen to. And then we play it there, and it didn't sound so great on my headphones.
It's
And
like
then
a
I'm
let-
like, and then
a
on top of that,
letdown.
I'm like, that singer's not very good either.
I thought it was okay. I don't think it's a bad choice for music.
No, I think it's a
kinda
good
the tone.
choice. I didn't realize it when we watched the clip, but
How bad the singer was.
right, listening to it, I'm like, I don't think she's hitting the notes there.
So there's a couple things happening. The scene that you see is Ed Kemper talking to Holden, and he's basically saying, "Hey, is there a guy that you can't catch?" And that kind of sets the whole scene for season 2.
Mm-hmm. Well, that to me. Okay, so we know some things that are going to happen in season 2. And
Well, things because of season 1 we can assume, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to stray away from that.
right, but I mean, I'm more so from the clip that we just watched. We know that there are some things that are going to happen in season 2. Not just, but we also, anybody that has read the book MindHunter or followed John Douglas's career, you know about where the story has to go. I mean, it's the story is his story, his life.
Right.
So we know some things that are going to happen, but for me, that little conversation right there with Ed Kemper is going to be the entree, man. That's going to be the big
Meat and potatoes.
yeah, that's going to be the big deal for me because I didn't anticipate that. And what's interesting about that is it appears that they may be having some kind of conversation where before Holden and Bill Tench, yeah. So Holden and Bill are trying to learn about these individuals that they are interviewing.
Yeah.
And this conversation, it sounds like they are telling him about somebody that they're trying to catch, somebody they're trying to apprehend, and wanting to get insights from Ed Kemper about who they may be looking for and how to catch him. So now we have a very Jack Crawford, Hannibal Lecter type situation going on.
Yeah, meat and potatoes. Now, what's interesting though is so we kind of know from before and some of the little scenes, and one of the things that I thought was so brilliant about Mindhunter season 1 was every episode they would have these little clips, maybe a minute long, maybe 30 seconds long, of this individual, and you just kind of didn't know what his deal was, but they'd always tell you where he was from, and it was Kansas City. So you do a little bit of the research, even if you haven't read the book, you would go, okay, this is the BTK killer.
Yeah.
And-
Kansas City, Park City.
Yeah.
It's always Kansas.
Yeah, so knowing that he was never really in season 1 other than these little clips, which I just thought was artistically, I just thought was brilliant. And then you see this scene where there's this rope that is tied to something that is tied to a door handle, and the door is shaking a little bit, and it is freaky.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another scene where you see an individual that is wearing the now infamous BTK mask.
Mm-hmm.
And he had multiple masks, but there was one that probably is the scariest one, the one that looks more like human flesh tone, like as far as because some of his mask would be like bright white with kind of clown makeup almost.
Mhm.
This one was more like, skin tone with lipstick. And
Yeah.
you see a clip of somebody wearing that mask.
A lot of those masks, from my understanding, were always that skin tone, that flesh color, but he would apply makeup to the mask in different ways, and some of that was he would try to apply makeup to the mask to mimic one of his victims.
Yeah.
And the way that the victim would wear their makeup, or makeup that he may have stole from their house or their purse or something like that. But and one of the victims was found with a mask on, and it's believed. I don't know if I should say if it's believed or if we know, according to Dennis Rader's words, he did return to the body because it wasn't discovered. This was one of the rare ones that he placed out in the wilderness somewhere out in the woods. And so he returned to the body to photograph the body. And I don't remember when he placed her there, if the mask was already on her, or if when he returned, he applied the mask to the body and then took the photographs. But yeah, so that scene that you're seeing there is something we heard directly from John Douglas when I spoke with him on the phone, when he was saying, hey, Dennis Rader told me that he was almost caught a couple times, and the times that he was almost caught was because his wife walked in on him when he was, playing dress up and, tying himself up and something like that. And his wife caught him, I think, twice, according to John Douglas. So what we're seeing there is what Rader was saying was, I wasn't almost caught by police. I was almost caught to the point of my wife either leaving me, and I'm certain some paranoia of, well, my wife might figure out who I am. BTK was certainly a big deal in that area for a long time. And he was able to live undetected underneath the same roof as this lady. And, I was actually talking with somebody on our blog last week about Delphi. And we were talking about the trading back some thoughts on the audio clip that they have, of the killer saying, guys down the hill. And one thing that I brought up, and I don't think that I brought this up when we were talking about it, but sometimes when I listen to it, that clip of the Delphi killer, sometimes when I listen to it, when they don't tell me at the bottom of the screen what he's saying, guys down the hill, and I'm allowed to use my own imagination or use just my ears to determine what I think that I'm hearing, sometimes I think I hear guys get down the hill. Guys get down the hill. And I brought this up on our blog in talking with several people for just the simple fact that we know Dennis Rader was recorded when he called to report one of his crimes, one of his murders. He was recorded when he called the operator. And they played that audio clip. I mean, how weird, right? These cases and investigations, a lot of them have some similarities.
Yeah, mimic each other.
Yeah. And so they played the audio clip of him talking to the operator on like the nightly news that night. And he and his wife were sitting there in the family room watching the news together. She hears the audio and she says to Dennis, hey, you sound a lot like the BTK killer. And Dennis, in the heat of the moment, probably on the inside, he's going crazy.
Right, sweating bullets.
But on the outside, he's like, he shrugs it off. He's like, you're not the first person to tell me that, or you're not the only one that has told me that. He says something very just in the moment, and his wife didn't think twice about it. And that's one thing that...
And he said, can you go make me some meat and potatoes?
But then that makes you think about Delphi and the bridge guy, and has the people closest to him heard...
Well, question for you, because I don't know offhand, and you probably know, being the true crime expert. Dennis Rader, how long did it take for them to catch him? several decades. Multiple decades.
3 decades.
Yeah.
Let's say a little more than 3 decades. So he started killing, what was that, 73, 74. Just pardon me, I'm going off of memory here. But one thing that's interesting about BTK and the FBI and John Douglas and Robert K. Ressler, who Bill Tench, I don't know what his last name is. I don't know what that character's name is, but he's supposed to be Robert K. Ressler. Okay. So Ressler and Douglas did have some loose involvement with BTK back in the day, but it was it's weird that it's mixed up in this whole MindHunter story because
you're saying they're not the guys that hunted him down.
They weren't really actively searching for BTK. That was more on the local level, more on the state level, not so much on the federal level. And it wasn't because that they didn't want the behavioral science unit involved. And it's actually called something different in real life, but that's what the general public thinks that it's called. It's not that they didn't want them involved. They certainly sought out their expertise and wanted their opinions on some things, but it was more so that they were so actively working these other cases.
Yeah.
And there was also the problem with BTK too, was there was times when he was not actively killing people. And so that confused law enforcement and confused the FBI to the point where they thought, oh, he went away, he moved, he died, he's in prison for something else. So unfortunately, when you have other cases, it also makes it seem like that's not a priority. You know, I hate to say it that way, but that's the truth. So they weren't super active. They did give a lot of thoughts and opinions on BTK, and we went through a lot of that information when we covered BTK in 3 episodes.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting things about BTK was the relationship with the FBI and on the state level when they would analyze his writings and the things that he would send to newspapers and what information they tried to gain and gather about this killer from the stuff that he was providing to them.
Right.
Now, what you can see in the clip for MindHunter season 2 is, okay, so they've returned to talk to Ed Kemper. We know from talking to John Douglas ourselves that he said that Kemper was one of the more fascinating, more interesting killers that he spoke to. One, because Kemper liked to talk so much. And Kemper was extremely smart, so he could articulate things in a way that other killers could not to him and to Robert K. Ressler.
Well, and I think, you have, artistic license to kind of shift the series however you want. It doesn't have to necessarily go with the books. And that's where I'd kind of be interested to know from the writer's standpoint, what was Ed's involvement going to be? Was that predetermined before season 1? Was season 2 even wrote yet? Or, because if I'm writing season 2 and we're not writing till after season 1, Ed's character is so great that you almost want to, how can we write him in?
Yeah, he's the star of season 1.
Yeah, and so so that I would be interested just on a creative level. Was this planned in advance, or did we know that Ed was going to be coming back, and maybe Ed's going to be a guy that kind of like Holden and Bill kind of continues throughout the season or throughout the series, as they develop more seasons on this. So the other couple things that we see that are interesting, speaking of Sharon Tate, was that you see a frame that looks like Charles Manson. Mm-hmm. So we're going to see something about him in this one, I would assume.
They interviewed Charles Manson. I think the dude that's playing Manson actually played Manson in something else as well.
Right.
So I think he looks a lot like pictures that we see of Manson from that time period.
Can you imagine, though? I mean, poor guy gets casted in a thing, and you're probably happy to have the work, but it's like, yeah, it's because I look a lot like him. And then you get cast in another thing. Hey, who's the guy that played Charles in the other thing? Let's just get him.
I think, though, the way that I read this was it was like it was kind of an attaboy. Like, you did such a good job the first time that now you're that guy, and yeah, nobody wants to look like Charles Manson, but you can just shave and get a haircut, and then you don't look like Charles Manson.
Well, that would be almost as if somebody said, "Look, Ed Kemper is so interesting in this MindHunter series. Let's do a spin-off and do an 8-part series with Ed Kemper." I could see a lot of people interested in watching something like that. But again, it's just the fact that you look enough like this individual, this awful individual. So you see Ed Kemper. You also see Berkowitz. Am I saying that correctly?
David Berkowitz.
Yeah, and
Beelzebub, the chubby behemoth.
The chubby behemoth.
Yeah.
So you see Son of Sam, and that's interesting. And again, that just puts a giant timestamp if you haven't seen Summer of Sam, I think is the name of the movie, with John Leguizamo, which was also in The Chef. But yeah, so it's a timestamp of the 70s, and then you pointed out something that I think I got the second time or the third time that I watched. But the scene that I got was you kind of see a car driving along going slow, and there's a little black boy, maybe 10, 12 years old, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw that image, I thought, oh, Atlanta child murders. But I didn't know that for sure. And then when we were talking about the trailer just seconds ago, you brought that up. Which is a good point, good pointing that out. But there's also other scenes in the trailer that once you said it and we rewatched the trailer, you go, oh, that could be actually, you can't tell from a trailer, obviously, because you don't know why they picked which clips or what they're trying to do. But it's only a minute-long trailer, and there's more clips of that than there are of Charles Manson. So again, maybe they just show an interview with Charles Manson. Maybe they just show an interview with Son of Sam, but maybe this is a bigger part of the story, is kind of what you were saying.
Well, what will be interesting to me is if that conversation between Holden and Ed Kemper, who's that about? Because on the surface, you want to go, well, that might be about BTK, but it also very likely could be about the Atlanta child killer.
Well, they might never even talk about the BTK for all we know. It could be
because they didn't in season 1. They just show these little clips,
right? And what I stated at the I think the middle of season 1, or as I was watching it, and me and you were talking about it, I said it would be genius, absolute genius, if they don't even get to BTK on the second season. And still have him be like this recurring, we show a 2-minute clip of BTK every episode, and keep that going, because we obviously know that he wasn't caught in the 70s. So, and it seems like this whole time frame, it's not like a True Detective where it's going back and forth in time and everything. So I would assume that, they're obviously not going to catch him. That doesn't mean they might not bring him up in their talks, but like you said, is this conversation that we hear at the beginning, is this about Dennis Rader, or is this about the Atlanta child murders?
Yeah, so from my understanding, I think John Douglas had some loose involvement. The FBI had some loose involvement in the BTK case, and I think it was fairly early on, right?
Right.
And so this was a case that, as it continued, they weren't really active in the actual investigation. Now, Dennis Rader was not apprehended until 2005, and he started killing in the early 70s. So this was always like kind of a hobby case for John Douglas. It was one that he always kept an eye on from afar and kept, if he were ever in the area working another case, he would go and hope to get some information. And so he always kept an eye on this case. And so the way that I think that the story, if I was a betting man,
betting man.
Here's the way that I love this. We're trying to deduce what somebody might do with something that you can fictionalize in parts. I read somewhere a year or so ago that MindHunter's already predetermined to be 5 seasons. That's it, and that's all. So 5 seasons, which was kind of a real kick in the a real kick in the junk there, because you want as many seasons as possible. But
kick in the grundle.
So let's just absorb that kick together, friends. Let's absorb
Let's
this.
hold hands together.
A moment of silence.
Well, to me, I it's weird because, as we've, I think, we start 2015, something like that, and somebody mentioned the other day that during the question and answer, I said, "True crime's not my thing," and I stand by that. It's not my thing. It's a percentage. Everybody has percentage. Some people, true crime it's 98% of everything they do. Back then I stand by it. It's a percentage, but the more cases that we have covered, the psychology of what is happening in the actual murder and the planning of the murder, and the search for the murderer has fascinated me more and more every year that we have dove into this. And then the psychology of the detectives. And we kind of talked about this with the Delphi when he brings up a movie about this cabin, about grief and everything. And again, I think it's just, he was presenting an idea. The sergeant was presenting an idea that a community was grieving, and this movie was about grieving. But little things like that I've been hanging on to so much. And when True Detective Season 3 came out, and again, they're fictional works, but I think it's the psychology of these people trying to figure out. And just last week, I went back and read, and we've done this on several cases, where you're reading the profile that the FBI came up with or somebody came up with.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they catch the bastard, the profile fits so similar. It's so similar. There's things in there when the profile's made that you're like, what?
Most of the time, yeah. I think the majority of the time. But it's really, to me, no different, and this is what I think is fascinating about it. It's, when you're playing poker, okay, you're sitting at a table playing poker, you know what cards you have in your hand. You might know, if you're playing Texas Hold'em, you know what cards are on the table. You do not know what cards your opponents have, and you do not know what cards still remain in the deck.
Right, and that's very similar to crime in the sense of,
right,
if you're a detective, you know what you hold, and then what's on the table. That's the murder. That's the murder scene. That's the scenario. But
the thing is, when you're looking at your cards and the cards that are on the table, regardless of not knowing what your opponents have, you know that a full house beats a straight. Right. So if you're chasing a full house because you think that somebody else may have a straight or something higher than what you currently hold in your hand, you can mathematically go, okay, well, judging by the cards that I have in my hand and the cards that are on the table, how many opportunities does that leave me to get to that full house that wins? Okay. It's the same thing with what they're doing in the profile. And what's so genius about Robert Ressler and John Douglas, what they did was they're like, look, let's go interview all of these known serial killers that are behind bars. Let's interview them, find out who they are, what they're into, what What makes them tick?
Yeah, right. What cards are they holding?
Yeah, and then from there you go, okay, well, we have this unsolved case, and here's what we know based off of the evidence. How can we apply what we've learned, the knowledge that we've already established from these killers that we've already interviewed? So, and then they're just going to apply that. It's kind of a numbers game is what you're doing, where you're going, okay, well, we've seen that a lot of times these people grew up they were abused. They abused animals. They killed animals. They wet the bed. They were stutterers, or, there's
played with fire.
Yeah, played with fire. There's all these different things, and they go, okay, well, it's just a numbers game because we've seen that the majority of the time by killers who do this or do that, and then apply it to your unsolved case. With season 2 and going forward with season 3, 4, and 5, the way that I think that this whole story is going to play out is I think that you're going to continue to see clips of Dennis Rader, BTK, who they will not be actively investigating for most of these clips. Most of them have just so far been him by himself, or he's waiting. The one where he's waiting in the home, remember that case? We talked about that one where the woman never came home.
Right.
And he got fed up and he left. So they showed a clip of that in season 1. And now you see that he's doing the thing with ADT, which we know that was provided him the ability to drive around and not have to answer to a lot of people or account for his time. I think what you're going to see with BTK is that's going to be the end of the whole 5 seasons. I think it's going to continue to build up and build up and build up, and then season 5 will be the apprehension of Dennis Rader, as well as John Douglas going to interview Dennis Rader, because we know that he interviewed him after he was locked up. I think Douglas was actually retired at the time and asked for special permission to go interview Dennis Rader. And Rader, with the egomaniac that Rader is, he gladly accepted an interview with John Douglas. I mean, Rader read true crime most of his life and probably read several of John Douglas's books. But
well, so we got season 1 done, season 2 70s, season 3 maybe 80s, season 4 90s, season 5 2000s.
Well, I think that
in 2005, so that would make sense.
Yeah, and I think
if they do it that way.
I think season 2 will end in the early 80s because the Atlanta child murders took place between 79 and 81.
Or this one could end in early 80s.
That's what I mean, season 2.
Well, okay. I'm sorry, I'm half awake.
Yeah, so season 2 is going to feature, I think, for a large portion of season 2, the Atlanta child murders.
Right.
And that took place from 79 to 81. Wayne Williams, I'm guessing it might have been as late as 82 that he was convicted. I guarantee you they're going to go through the trial in this season. They're going to do that as kind of a complete story. Now, what will be interesting too is what other cases, unsolved cases, do they investigate along the way? Because the whole idea that we are presented with in season 1 is that while we were out either teaching this method to police departments or to law enforcement agencies, we will then visit killers in the area who are inmates in the area and interview them at that time. Or, we're out investigating an unsolved case, and we go conduct these interviews around the same time. So
I wonder if there's just going to be less of that because we've already seen, like I said, Son of Sam, Charles Manson. We've seen that they talked to Kemper. So I just wonder if there's going to be more of talking to the killers and less them solving crimes, because there was a lot of crimes last season.
Well, it makes me wonder if they're going to be investigating a crime in California where we know Manson is housed.
Yeah.
And then in New York where we know David Berkowitz serving time. And so that will be interesting. I think that if I remember correctly, there was a crime in New York and a murder that took place in New York, and I don't know if it would line up at this same time period, but there was a crime that this murder took place, and I can't remember the victim's name, and I'm not going to go into detail because it could be part of season 2. it was one of those murders where the profile solved the crime, which is super rare, super, super rare. But it was an instance where the profile itself led to the direct apprehension of the killer.
Interesting.
And I know it took place in New York, so it would be interesting if that's why they are interviewing David Berkowitz at the same time, if that tends to match up with it. And I love John Douglas, but Douglas, there's several things that he likes to point out, and one of those is when he is right. And he likes to remind us of when he is right, and that's
everybody likes to do that, though.
But it's also his job when you think about it, because that division and that method of investigation and that investigative tool that they came up with and put together, some people don't have any belief in it. And so in a way, to keep that around, you do have to sell that. You have to sell what you're making.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that could have went away, something that these guys were doing very well. And there's others. There's Roy Hazelwood. There's many other FBI agents that were involved in this program for many, many years. But, you know, I took some criticism one time that people say, whoever, you only talk about John Douglas and Robert Ressler. And so I wanted to give Hazelwood some credit there. But keep in mind, that's who MindHunter is about, who this show is about. Mm-hmm. And that's why we got to it so often. So Atlanta child murders, that's going to be super interesting, because if anybody listened to our coverage, which was a long time ago.
Long time. Get the Stitcher app and then listen to it for free.
But it was one of those cases where they brought in the super cops, and the FBI was brought in as part of this task force. This Atlanta child killing case is a monumental case. It was huge at the time because there were so many murders happening so quickly that the whole nation was basically watching Atlanta.
Right.
For those 2 years. Once this thing picked up and got legs and started running, the whole country was watching Atlanta. And this task force in the FBI went in there and they stomped out the problem. They shook some trees and Wayne Williams fell out of one of those trees, and they locked him up. Now, what's weird about that case is there are some that say Wayne Williams didn't do it. Wayne Williams is one of those people. Wayne Williams is complete asshole. He absolutely killed several people. He may not have killed all 28. There were 28 victims in that 2-year time period.
Right.
That's a lot of victims in a short period of time. He has actually only been convicted of 2 of those 28. So 26 of those are technically unsolved cases. Many of those 26, he very likely was the killer. It's also very likely that he didn't kill all 26 of those unsolved cases. That 1 or 2 or 3 may have been another killer that just got lumped in with his activity at the time. But one thing that's interesting is in March of this year, the city came together and went to the mayor and said, look, those unsolved cases, can you have the agencies that were investigating them at the time, can you have them reopen those cases? Because here we are now over 30 years later.
Yeah. Technology
has changed. Detective work and investigative tools have changed. And they're saying, let's go ahead and if Wayne Williams did more of these, and we can definitively say that, let's close out some of these cases.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see what they come up with that. I mean, that was just March of this year. So you would think we might start hearing some movement on those. I don't know if they're using DNA in some of those cases.
Yeah,
that's not
I'm
what
sure.
they said, but
right. But I'm sure that in some of the cases they could. And what I always wondered was, because it became such a national story, and some of the stuff that I was reading about the KKK in that area is that it opened up a opportunity. You know, you have these kids being murdered, and then it opens up an opportunity for you to move into the area and possibly do some things. So I'm not saying that that is what happened, but it always frustrates me when you're talking with individuals about cases like this and they can't see the idea that it doesn't have to just be, did this guy kill all the kids? He either killed them all or he didn't kill any of them. And I don't think that's really how that case probably would shake down if we're able to dive into each case individually. I think he might be responsible for most of them, but I think that because of that situation, it's kind of like back with the Vanishing Women from Chillicothe. You have a couple women go missing, that opens up, I think, opportunity for other killers. Possibly the same thing with Long Island serial killer.
Well, and the thing too that's so important to the story of MindHunter, the Atlanta child case was huge for the behavioral science unit, the BSU, because there was a threat of it going away, of that unit going away, that the FBI was going to decommission that unit and
right.
and
that might be a part of season 2.
Well, it should be, because they were going to decommission the unit, or there were talks of doing that. And then when the super cops and the task force was put together in the Atlanta case and then solved the Atlanta case, that's when it changed everything. That's when it skyrocketed, and they're like, well, we have to have this unit. The biggest case in, some people were calling that the biggest case in American history at the time. And it was certainly one of the biggest serial killer cases of all time. It gets dismissed by current day because it was so short of a time period, and it's not one that's talked about a whole heck of a lot. But at the time, and anybody that lived through that's older than me, I was just 1 or 2 years old when that whole thing was going on. But anybody that was a teenager or an adult at that time will tell you that case was huge. And when the FBI and the task force came in there and straightened this whole thing out, look, they were not close to solving it until the super cops came in. And the first thing that the BSU did when they came in was they put together a profile of the killer. And at the time, the general public and law enforcement believed that the killer was likely white. Well, the FBI and these super cops in the task force, they started going into these neighborhoods where the kids were disappearing from. And the first thing that they noticed was they stood out like a sore thumb, and that the general public in those areas were not so receptive to seeing a couple white guys in a suit driving around in a car that they didn't recognize. And so the first thing that they came up with in their profile was the killer is African American. The victims are African American. And the reason why they came up with that was this guy would have been caught. Had he been white, he would have been noticed and remembered by more people in the area. The reason why Wayne Williams went undetected was he fit into the area of where he was abducting his victims. He didn't stand out for any reason. He wasn't anything special. He fit into that area. And it was just that simple twist. And when they released that profile, that changed everything, because a lot of people challenged that and said, you brought in these guys that it's like they're looking into a crystal ball, right? And they're doing something we don't understand. It's hocus pocus, man.
Voodoo.
Yeah. And turns out that they were right. And I don't care what anybody says, especially Wayne Williams, who claims his innocence. And I won't have a conversation with anybody that says Wayne Williams is innocent for this very fact. And they will point this out in season 2, 100%. And this is one of my favorite moments for John Douglas's career. They weren't convinced that they were going to get a conviction of Wayne Williams. Wayne Williams is such an egomaniac and thought that he was so smart, so much smarter than the police. He was taunting the police. Like when he started putting bodies in the water because he would watch the news and they're like, we found some evidence on this body. He's like, all right, cool, I'll change up what I'm doing. And then when the police would issue some kind of warning and tell people not to do this, tell the public not to do that, he would go out of his way to commit a murder that would involve what their warning was. So in a way, he was playing a game with them, not only for his own fantasy, but to be this serial killer, much like Dennis Rader, playing a game with them.
Right.
And so he was such an egomaniac that he told his lawyer, I'm going to take the stand. They don't have shit on me, and I'm going to get up there. I'm smarter than this prosecutor. I'm smarter than the jury. I'm smarter than the judge. I'm going to get up there. I'm going to defend myself. And when I get off the stand, they're going to see they have nothing on me. They're going to let me go. So the FBI, the BSU, spoke with the prosecutor and the prosecuting team for days and days and days. And they said, what you have to do is get him to lose control on the stand. You have to trick him. He thinks he's smarter than you. He is going to have an answer for everything you say.
Right.
So you need to wind him up like a toy, and then eventually you let him go. And if you give him enough rope, he'll hang himself. And with Wayne Williams, for anybody that thinks that he's innocent, you got as close to a confession as you can possibly get with this individual. So the prosecutor starts winding him up, right? Wayne Williams is on the stand. And the prosecutor comes in there peppering him with questions, statements, body blow, jab, pepper him. He gets Wayne Williams so wound up that Wayne is now question, boom, answer, question, boom, answer, question, boom, answer. And then the prosecutor gets louder and louder and louder and closer and closer and closer. And then he leans in right into Wayne Williams' face. And he said, when you were choking those children and you saw the look in their eyes, were you afraid? And Wayne Williams said, no. He wound him up and got him. That's as close to a confession as you're going to get. And it was with that one word, no, that jury convicted Wayne Williams of 2 of the murders. Now, after the trial, the media was so fascinated by these super cops and by the BSU and John Douglas that came in from the FBI and really took this case, this investigation that was going absolutely nowhere. They weren't going to solve this thing. They were not going to solve this thing until the super cops came in. And so the media is fascinated by this whole new process, as was America, that they interviewed John Douglas. Now, this is where, same thing though. John Douglas, I love him, but you give him enough rope and he'll hang himself as well. And this is where John Douglas's name skyrocketed. This is where, when John Douglas not only became famous, but he also got in hot water with the FBI because they asked, remember, there was still controversy at the time. Did Wayne Williams, was he the Atlanta child killer?
Right.
Was he the man who killed 28 people, some children, some adults? And Douglas very publicly said, you know, he was kind of walking and they shove a microphone in his face and ask him a couple questions. Is Wayne Williams the Atlanta child killer? Did he kill 28 people? And Douglas says, well, I like him for a lot of these, or I like him for most of these.
Right.
So that's Douglas too, admitting 100% he doesn't know if Wayne Williams killed all these people, but he certainly killed a good bunch of them. And so this got Douglas in trouble with the FBI because they're like, look, you can't be commenting on a case in the public like that, especially not without our permission, without permission from your higher ups. But this little clip, this little interview was played across the country, and that's where, again, Douglas became a name that was known throughout law enforcement.
Right.
But he also got himself in hot water with the FBI.
Well, if you can't tell, you crazy animals, that we're excited about season 2 of MindHunter, then you got some problems. I think Nick just went on a 20-minute rant.
I'm sorry, but yeah.
No.
Somebody put on our blog like a month or so ago, they're like, I feel like True Crime Garage is just one long commercial for MindHunter.
Well, maybe it is. Maybe it is.
Maybe that's the genius of MindHunter.
Maybe we're 6 son of a bitches.
Yeah, we're puppets. And John Douglas is behind. He's above the garage.
Yeah, for all you guys
manipulating.
know this, our show was started by the FBI. It was started by the FBI in a garage.
All right, we said too much. Shut it down.
All right, so MindHunter, check out the trailer, and you say season 2 starts when, you think?
I think it's, I'm going to look at a calendar here because I think it's a Friday and we're getting close. I think it's Friday the 16th.